That hairline crack running across your foundation wall isn't just getting bigger. It's getting more expensive every single month you let a contractor be the only one who understands it. And here's the thing, nobody tells you when you first notice it. The crack itself isn't the problem. The problem is that an entire industry built its recurring revenue model around making sure you believe you can't fix it yourself. $1.49 says otherwise. What you're about to learn isn't a temporary patch. It isn't caulk dressed up with a fancy name on a tube. This is a crystalline bonding reaction that, once it sets inside a crack, becomes structurally stronger than the surrounding concrete. The repair doesn't just fill the gap, it fuses with the wall at a molecular level and keeps expanding as long as moisture is present, which means it self-reinforces for years after you apply it. Contractors know this exists. They just prayed you'd forget it did. There's a reason the average foundation crack repair estimate starts at $4,000 and climbs from there, and it has nothing to do with how complicated the job actually is. I've talked to 3 retired masons in the last year, guys who spent decades doing this work, and every single one of them said the same thing unprompted. The materials cost almost nothing. What you're paying for, overwhelmingly, is the mystique. The idea that foundation work requires specialized knowledge, specialized equipment, and a licensed professional with a truck full of products you've never heard of. The structural repair industry in the United States generates somewhere around $4.5 billion a year. A meaningful chunk of that comes from residential foundation work. Cracks, seepage, crumbling mortar, efflorescence. And the products driving the high-margin professional side of that business are, in many cases, modern synthetic reformulations of compounds that were freely available to any homeowner before the mid-1960s. The reformulations aren't stronger. In several documented comparisons by independent materials engineers, they're actually weaker over long time frames. But they carry proprietary names, they require professional application warranties, and they generate return visits. The old stuff? One application, done. The shift happened gradually between about 1958 and 1971. Before that window, hardware stores stocked dry masonry repair compounds that any person could mix and apply with a putty knife. Simple instructions on the bag, no mystique, no license required. As the contractor services industry professionalized and consolidated, the retail availability of the most effective compounds quietly narrowed. Not through legislation, not through any dramatic event, just through the slow, ordinary economics of shelf space, distribution deals, and the steady migration of effective products from retail aisles into contractor-only supply accounts. The industry didn't suppress this knowledge maliciously. It just stopped having any financial reason to share it. And here we are. In 55 BC, Julius Caesar's military engineers were crossing rivers and sealing aqueducts using a compound that is, chemically, almost identical to what I'm going to hand you today. They called the raw material pozzolana, a volcanic ash mined from deposits near the town of Pozzuoli in southern Italy. And they discovered something remarkable about it. Mixed with seawater and lime, it didn't just harden. It hardened underwater. It got stronger in wet conditions. It kept curing for decades. The Pantheon in Rome has a concrete dome poured in approximately 125 AD. No rebar, no synthetic admixtures, no contractor warranty. It is standing right now, uncracked, after 19 centuries. Modern Portland cement structures, the stuff in your foundation, are engineered to last 50 to 100 years under ideal conditions. The Romans weren't smarter than modern engineers. They were just working with materials that prioritized permanent bonding chemistry over production cost and shelf life optimization. And here's the part that took me a while to sit with. Roman pozzolanic concrete was largely forgotten after the fall of the empire. For about 1,000 years, European builders used inferior mortars that crumbled within generations. Then, in the 18th and 19th centuries, material scientists rediscovered the pozzolanic reaction and reverse engineered why it worked. That understanding directly led to the development of Portland cement, the basis of every modern concrete mix. But somewhere in the translation from ancient chemistry to industrial product, a specific property got quietly de-emphasized. The crystalline expansion reaction, the self-sealing, moisture-activated behavior that made Roman concrete perform better in wet environments over time rather than worse. That property still exists in certain formulations. It never went away. It just stopped being the selling point. Here's where most people's eyes glaze over, so I'm going to give you the only analogy you'll ever need. To understand why modern crack fillers fail and this powder doesn't, think about a sponge versus a crystal. When you press a sponge into a gap and it dries, you have a sponge-shaped plug. It fills the space, but it has its own internal structure, a structure that can compress, expand, absorb, and eventually fatigue. Put enough water pressure behind it over enough freeze-thaw cycles and the sponge deforms. The plug loosens, the crack reopens. That is exactly how modern elastomeric crack sealers and polyurethane injection foams behave over time. They are engineered sponges. Flexible, yes, but flexible means compressible. Compressible means eventually the crack wins. Now imagine instead that you fill that gap with something that, on contact with moisture, begins growing crystals. Not metaphorical crystals, actual mineral crystals, calcium silicate hydrate chains, threading into the pores of the surrounding concrete on both sides of the crack. The crystal structure doesn't fill the void. It becomes part of the wall. The original concrete matrix and the new material knit together into a single unified structure. There is no boundary between old and new that water can exploit. There is no polymer chain that UV, light, or temperature cycling can degrade. There is just stone. This is the mechanism behind hydraulic cement, and specifically behind the crystalline expansion variant that's been in masonry supply catalogs since before World War II. The chemistry is not exotic. Calcium, silica, alumina, and water. The same elements in Roman pozzolana, reformulated through 19th century material science into a stable dry powder that any person can buy, mix, and apply in 20 minutes. What makes modern crack fillers look impressive in the short term is exactly what makes them fail in the long term. Flexible sealers show no cracking for the first 2 or 3 years because they're moving with the wall, but they're not bonded to it. They're riding it. And the moment the adhesion at either edge gives way, from temperature stress, from slight foundation movement, from the simple mechanical fatigue of a material that was never designed to be permanent, the water finds its way back in. You call the contractor again. He shows you the crack. He gives you an estimate. The cycle continues. The compound is called hydraulic cement powder, specifically the fast-set crystalline expansion variant, and you can find a 2-pound bag of it at any hardware store for under $1.50. It goes by a few brand names. Hydrol-Nime is one, Waterplug is another, and several generic masonry supply versions exist under the simple label fast-set hydraulic cement. You want the powder form, not a premixed paste. The paste versions have extended working times achieved through chemical retarders that reduce the crystalline bonding strength. You want the raw powder, that's where the reaction lives. Here's the exact process, because the application method matters almost as much as the material. Start by cleaning the crack, not with a brush, with a cold chisel and a hammer. This sounds counterintuitive. You want to open the crack slightly, undercut the edges, so the interior of the crack is wider than the surface opening. Think of it like a dovetail joint. The repair material will key into that undercut geometry and become mechanically locked in addition to being chemically bonded. If you skip this step and just pack material into a surface width crack, you're relying entirely on adhesion. The undercut gives you adhesion plus mechanical interlock. That combination is what makes this permanent. Once the crack is prepared, wet it down thoroughly. Get water into the crack and let it soak for a few minutes. This serves 2 purposes. It removes loose particulate that would weaken the bond, and it begins pre-saturating the concrete matrix, so the hydraulic cement doesn't lose its mixed water to absorption during curing. Dry concrete is thirsty. It will pull moisture out of your repair mix before the crystalline reaction has time to complete. Wet the crack first, and you remove that variable. Now mix the powder. The ratio is roughly 3 parts powder to 1 part water by volume, though you'll develop a feel for it after the first application. You're aiming for a consistency between peanut butter and stiff dough. Not wet enough to pour, not dry enough to crumble. Mix it in a small container. A paper cup works fine. And mix only what you can use in about 3 to 5 minutes. Fast-set hydraulic cement begins its crystalline reaction quickly. That's the point. You're not racing against an arbitrary product clock. You're working with a material that's actively trying to become stone from the moment water touches it. Pack it into the crack with a gloved hand or a pointed trowel. Push it in and hold moderate pressure for 60 to 90 seconds. You'll feel it warming slightly against your fingers. That's the exothermic reaction beginning, the calcium silicate hydrate crystals forming. Keep pressure on it. If water is actively seeping through the crack, the fast-set variant will stop that flow within about 45 seconds of application under normal pressure conditions. This is why it was used in below-grade commercial waterproofing for decades before the industry migrated to injection systems. Leave it completely alone for 24 hours. Don't test it, don't paint over it, don't seal over it. The crystalline growth continues well beyond the initial set and will keep propagating into the pore structure of the surrounding concrete for weeks. At 72 hours, the repair has reached the majority of its final strength. At 30 days, it has reached full cure and, in the presence of ongoing moisture, is measurably stronger than it was at day 3. Total cost for a standard basement wall crack, let's say 12 inches long and 3 millimeters wide, roughly 40 cents of material. Professional repair for the equivalent crack using epoxy injection or carbon fiber stapling, $1,200 to $3,000 depending on your market and the contractor's read on your anxiety level. When you walk down to that basement after 3 weeks and press your thumb against what used to be a crumbling, weeping crack and feel nothing but dry, solid stone, that's not a repair. That's a restoration. The wall doesn't know the difference between the material that was poured in 1962 and the material you pressed in last Tuesday. The crystals don't care about the calendar. They just keep growing into the matrix, filling micropores you can't see, bonding to aggregate particles that no caulk gun could ever reach. You now understand the actual chemistry of foundation crack repair better than most homeowners ever will, and honestly, better than many contractors who've been doing this work for years, using systems they were trained on without being taught why the older methods existed in the first place. The knowledge didn't disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because there's no margin in a bag of powder that costs $1.50 and solves the problem permanently. Your grandparents' generation knew which hardware store aisle held this stuff. They used it on their own foundations, their own sidewalks, their own basement walls. The transfer of that knowledge got interrupted somewhere around the time home repair became a service industry rather than a skill set. That interruption cost a lot of homeowners a lot of money. It doesn't have to keep costing you. Go to any hardware store. The big box stores carry it, but masonry supply houses will have the best selection of variants. Ask for fast set hydraulic cement powder. It'll be in the masonry section, usually near the concrete patch products, often in a small bag that looks almost too humble for the job it does. Test it on one small crack first, if you want. Mark the date. Come back in 30 days. What you find there will tell you everything about what the industry spent decades not telling you. If this kind of recovered knowledge is useful to you, the real chemistry behind why things work, the economics behind why it got buried, the practical method that actually solves the problem, there's more of it. Subscribe, and you'll be there when the next one surfaces. And if someone you know just got a $4,000 foundation estimate, send this to them first. Let them decide with the full picture in front of them.